Good afternoon, colleagues, and greetings once again to those with whom we've already interacted this morning. Thank you for accepting to come for this site chat with our experts on regional integration and trade. I know you've been following the deliberations since day one, but we thought it wise to get together as members of the press and communications team, listen to our experts to kind of accentuate on some of the areas that we believe are worth reiterating, but also an opportunity for us to get questions answered by our experts. So we know that we all have to be back in the room at 4 o'clock, so I'm not going to rant for much longer. I'll hand over to, we'll start with my colleague to the far end of the table, Laura, and I'll allow her to introduce herself because she's the best person to do that. And then we'll come to the next, and then we'll take it in that order. So a brief remarks from her, and then brief remarks from the fine gentleman, and then we open it for questions.
Good afternoon, and delighted to be here at this press conference on the sidelines of our 55th COM. This is very timely, and we're happy to talk about regional integration with all of you today. My name is Laura Paez. I am the Chief of the Market Institutions section at the Regional Integration and Trade Division of the Economic Commission for Africa. Perhaps a little bit about the work we do at MIS. So being part of the sub-program on regional integration and trade, we care about market functionality in Africa. If we want to aspire to have a common market in the AfCFTA, we need to rid African markets of the dysfunctionalities that currently exist. And that is for all markets: goods, services, investment or capital markets, movement of persons. We want to see a continent on the move, free of barriers. And so the section that I head works on improving market asymmetries and market dysfunctionalities. And in that sense, the focus of our work is mainly on phase 2 issues of the AfCFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area. We like to focus our work on investment, competition, intellectual property issues, but also on services, value chains, and digital trade. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do at the Market Institutions section in our ITD. And we're very happy to take on questions from you as they come.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Ernest. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm also very happy to be here. You have not seen me around because I've been busy with other things. My name is Malaku Desta. I'm the coordinator of the Africa Trade Policy Center. The Africa Trade Policy Center is one of the 3 units within the Regional Integration and Trade Division within ECA. And we do a lot of work that centers right now around the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I see in front of you a little publication that you see. We called it the AfCFTA, What You Need to Know. And in fact, we prepared this booklet with a view to informing the general public. We wrote it for the non-specialist reader. And I hope those of you who might have had a chance to live through it, I hope you will have seen that, at least you will have seen the effort that we have made to communicate the dense and technical language that is, our mark in this field. We have tried to communicate with you and through you with the general public in day-to-day, accessible, easy to understand language. I'm sure you will still find some jargons there, for which I only apologize, but we are working very hard to improve it, and I'm very happy that you have it in front of you. Broadly, what we do is support the AfCFTA implementation process right now. We have been there from the beginning in terms of making the case for the AfCFTA from over 10 years ago, to supporting the drafting, the negotiation of the AfCFTA, campaigning for its adoption, ratification, and now supporting our member states with implementation strategies. Everything that we do today revolves around the AfCFTA, and we're very happy to take any question that you may have.
Yes, my name is Brian Ngugi from the Standard Media Group in Nairobi, Kenya. I've seen the booklet lists some of the roadblocks or challenges to implementing the regional trade pact. I was wondering, what does the Ukraine-Russia crisis mean for regional integration? Do you see it as a roadblock or maybe even an opportunity to accelerate integration? My second question is on the Pan-African payment system. I've seen the currency convertibility as a challenge. Do you see the PAPs as an opportunity to solve the liquidity crisis that we, especially most African countries, are facing now? Thanks.
I am Princess Gibson. I work for the Sierra Leone Broadcasting Corporation. I come from Sierra Leone. Yeah, during your brief statements, the key word is market functionality. And I think as Africa, we have not harnessed the market because of a lot of barriers, least investment. So as a center, how do you work on those barriers, infrastructure, to harness the market? There is a direct link.
Thank you so much, Ndamu Sandu, Business Times newspaper from Zimbabwe. The AfCFTA is seen as a Marshall Plan for Africa. But I wanted to find out from you, with the low level of industrialization, what can be done so that we will be able to produce for the continent? Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for these very important questions, I have to say. I will attempt on some of them, and the difficult ones I'm going to pass them over to my colleague Laura here. Okay? The first question is, what does the Ukraine-Russia crisis mean for regional integration in Africa? Is it an opportunity? Is it a challenge? I think it is both, in my mind. I think what the Russia-Ukraine crisis has exposed, yet again, just like what the COVID pandemic did, is Africa's vulnerability to external shocks for some of the most essential products for our survival. COVID exposed our vulnerability and our dependence on imported drugs, and the Ukraine-Russia crisis exposed our vulnerability, our dependence on imports for basic essential commodities such as wheat, fertilizer, and then energy products. So is that a challenge? For sure it's a challenge, but I take it as a short-term challenge. In the long term, I look at it more as an opportunity. I'm not going to say thanks to the crisis, because there is a lot of lives being lost, but because of the crisis, we are currently talking about fast-tracking trade in agricultural products, in food products within the AfCFTA. Why do we say that? Because we know while certain parts of Africa may be food deficit, we also know that certain parts of Africa are producers of surplus food products. So a functioning market, if I use Laura's terminology here, a functioning market is the best guarantee for us to make sure that surplus production in one part of Africa is made available to deficit market situations in another part of Africa. So in that sense, I think it is a wake-up call. It is an opportunity, but of course, in order to make sure that we are not going to be found in the same position next time a similar crisis arises, we have to be prepared for it now. We have to invest in all sorts of the inputs and technology and everything, but I think Africa has the capacity not only to feed itself, but to feed others. That's what I would say in the first one. Perhaps, yes, it is currency convertibility, payment systems. We know the numbers tell us that Africa already incurs in the region of $5 billion US dollars every year because of the need to use other currency, hard currency, as an intermediary. So perhaps the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System is designed to help us reduce that cost and, of course, to make products cheaper on the market. Because higher cost of transactions like the currency that we are talking about here means higher costs on the market. And that's not something that we would like to see. So certainly there is a huge potential. But will that help us to solve the liquidity crisis in Africa? I think the two are slightly different. It will contribute for sure, but the liquidity crisis that we are talking about, if I understand you correctly, we are talking about the foreign currency crisis. Yes, the more we reduce in terms of what we have to spend to facilitate our transactions by cutting out the middleman, for example, through the PAPs, we'll be saving some money. But that crisis, I think, requires a fundamental transformation in our productive capacities, in our trading systems. For that, I think the AfCFTA will play a significant role, but not immediately, not directly. My sister from Sierra Leone, you asked us, I think this is more to Laura, so I'll leave it to Laura. I think that was the difficult one that I was thinking about earlier. And then our colleague from Zimbabwe, you asked, you of course mentioned, referred to this expression as the AfCFTA, the Marshall Plan, and what can be done to address the issue of industrialization, I think is the key challenge, the key question here. The AfCFTA, as we say, is a trade agreement, the African Continental Free Trade Area. But we call it a trade area, free trade area, but it goes well beyond trade. And as reporters working in this field, I am sure you are aware of the recent decisions taken at the African Union Assembly level just a few weeks ago, in which 3 important instruments were adopted: a protocol on investment, a protocol on intellectual property, and a protocol on competition policy. These are instruments, legal instruments, that take the AfCFTA beyond a traditional free trade area. They take us into the domestic realm. Laura was talking earlier about market functionality. You cannot talk about market functionality in a situation where competition law, competition policy does not exist, or if it exists, it's not enforced, it's not observed. Look at investment, for example. So the question that you have asked me about the potential contribution of the AfCFTA for industrialization can be answered only if you look at the AfCFTA in the context of investment. Yes, the AfCFTA aims to create a single market, but probably the most powerful argument for the AfCFTA actually comes from investment. Think about the AfCFTA as this tool that, when it's implemented, will create a single market made up of 1.4 billion people with a spending capacity in the region of $3 trillion. And if there are no barriers across our borders, our politically drawn borders, our colonial inheritance, a product that you are producing in one country is going to have access to a market of 1.4 billion potential customers. There is no better, way of marketing Africa as an investment destination than, making this clear to the investment community. Because as soon as you produce something, you are not going to be limited by your political borders to sell your products within your country. You are allowed to reach, a huge market that increasingly, I know infrastructure has been raised, there are a number of challenges, but this is something that will take time to fully implement. We know that, we're aware of that, we're working on that. But the moment you implement the AfCFTA, you are creating the most powerful incentive for investors to base themselves within the continent. And therefore, industrialization is expected to follow from that. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malako. I think you've covered the questions quite well. Let me perhaps just come in to say that on the PAPs, right, and I think this is very important, we have the issue or the challenge of currency convertibility, right? But we also have seen that some regions on the continent have made quite laudable progress when it comes to, having a single currency, or progressing when it comes to, settling their payments through domestic currencies with payment systems. We can look at West Africa as an example. And so really the PAPS builds on these experiences and is allowing us to free up some of that liquidity that we need to have in order to trade with other partners. So if we can have a payment system where we're trading with our local currencies, right, there will be some space for us to have more liquidity on the continent to trade with the rest of the world. I think that's one important element. But of course, liquidity is not all. we also have to think in terms of trading platforms. And there's one initiative that you may be aware of that ECA has been promoting, and that is the ATIX, the Africa Trade Exchange Platform.
Yeah.
And this, of course, also goes in line with the response you heard our coordinator talk about with regards to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We've actually been able to trade on the platform products that have become scant due to those disruptions that we suffered in grain trade from Ukraine, in trade of fuels, in trade of other products. Equally so with the pharmaceuticals, with the COVID crisis. So we have a platform in place that will allow us, will allow businesses in Africa to connect and trade. So you need to have the payment system, but you also need to have the platforms for companies to trade. And so lo and behold, digital technology, économie numérique, is very, very important in the context of this. And these are some of the solutions that we're offering as an institution to also facilitate and promote trade in the context of what will be the AfCFTA common market. So I think that's very, very important to say. With regards to market functionality, as Melako also mentioned, some of these things are domestic issues. The main barriers we see in markets, why markets are dysfunctional in Africa, have to do with regulation. We don't have adequate regulation in place. Sometimes we don't even have regulation in place. And so the 3 protocols that he mentioned are going to take us a leap step forward, because we're going to have now common regulation on investment that will allow us to level the playing field for investors in the African market, African investors, but also foreign investors. And this is really where we have now a chance, because of a common sort of regulation and space, to see capital move on the continent. And capital needs to move for us to be able to harness the other gains that the AfCFTA promises. For example, we have done impact studies on the transport sector. We know that as a result of opening of the AfCFTA, for the continent to be able to trade, we will need around 1 million, 2 million containers, additional containers. And we will need so much more investments in infrastructures to the tune of $30 billion US. So of course we need that investment to be able to move around, because we will not be able to ship all those products if we don't have investment in infrastructures, if we don't ensure that we have all those projects of the transport corridors in place, if we don't implement PIDA. So you're seeing everything is very much interconnected. If we want to realize the full benefits of the AfCFTA, well, the investments have to be there, and it has to be critical in sectors that are the backbone of trade, such as transport. And so that too is very, very important when it comes to our work. What are the barriers in the transport sector? What are the barriers in the investment sector that we need to dismantle from a policy and from a regulation perspective, so that then we can have the expected trade flows and also employment opportunities and free movement of persons and free movement of services. We need to have all those freedoms in place for us to be able to fully realize the benefits of the AfCFTA. And on that note, I would also want to say that in order for us to increase the levels of industrialization, to be more productive on the continent, we need to look at regional value chains. There is potential on the continent, especially in services, for countries to connect better and to conduct cross-border trade through regional value chains. But we need to build them. Countries need to understand what is their comparative advantage. Where can they come in a value chain? Where can value be added? Where are the job opportunities there for all the youthful population that we have that need jobs, that need to have an income? The value chains concept, so to say, can help us also reduce the dependency from abroad, because really what we've seen with the COVID and also now with the Ukraine and Russia crisis is that disruptions in these global value chains are impacting so much on Africa, but the continent has a solution within itself. If we build our regional value chains, dependency from these other value chains abroad will decrease, and we'll be able to be more autonomous when it comes to trading and also harnessing the dividends of a free trade area. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup Ernest. C'est très difficile de n'avoir que quelques questions, surtout qu'on a l'occasion d'avoir des experts que vous êtes. Donc priez-moi d'avoir 4 petites questions. Non, vraiment courte,
Okay.
je promets.
Not to interrupt you, we're trying to make sure that this really was meant to carry the conversation outside the confines of our statutory discussion, so that we can have a more direct and engaging thing with them. And we are needed to be back in the room at 4. So just limit it to 1 or 2, and then we can have interviews later.
2 petites questions.
Thank you.
La première, c'est que jusque-là, les analyses sur le potentiel économique de la SLECAF, j'ai l'impression que ce potentiel n'a pas été mis à jour depuis. Est-ce qu'on est toujours sur les mêmes potentiels, malgré les crises de liquidité, les conjonctures internationales et tous les autres défis que nous avons aujourd'hui? Est-ce qu'on est toujours sur les mêmes attentes en termes de gains d'opportunités? Ça, c'est le premier point. La deuxième, c'est vrai que j'en avais plusieurs, mais la deuxième, je vais la poser, je vais arrêter. C'est comment est-ce que la CEA elle-même donne l'exemple d'un acteur économique qui favorise le marché régional. Dans ses commandes de services, dans ses commandes de biens, comment est-ce que la CEA consomme les produits de ces pays membres, des pays africains, pour encourager ce commerce? Je laisse les deux autres questions, peut-être que ce sera pour une prochaine fois.
Thank you. I'm going to answer the first question then, la première question. Okay. Yes, we are updating our studies, for sure. That's because new data comes up all the time. And there is, as we get new data, we feed the new information into our systems, and we are updating it as we go. In fact, there will be a new study that will be releasing very soon that will update what we had in 2019 or so, if I recall correctly. There will be differences, but I can already tell you because I have seen the preliminary results of that study. The contribution of the AfCFTA in terms of employment, in terms of incomes, GDP, intra-Africa trade, and overall welfare, it is positive. It remains positive for all countries. In some cases, the benefits at a sectoral level are coming out more clearly, and that positive story is actually emerging more convincing, more persuasive, if you like. Let me put it that way. Thank you.
Pour la deuxième question, bon, comme vous savez, on fait partie des Nations Unies, on n'est pas vraiment un acteur économique, et dans ce sens-là, on ne gère pas les magnitudes pour faire, une intervention économique par rapport aux achats de services ou de biens. Mais il faut aussi le dire, quand nous engage dans le pays, on source bien sûr, côté service par exemple, des consultants. Alors si on part vers le pays pour donner d'appui technique sur par exemple une guide électronique d'investissement, vous pouvez être certain qu'on va identifier un consultant qui pourra nous aider à populer la guide d'investissement dans ce pays. Alors, on consomme des produits africains et vous-même, vous êtes témoigne, on consomme ici de la bonne nourriture africaine, on consomme de bons services d'un hôtel africain et notamment dans toute la conférence, vous allez voir que tous nos partenaires, tous nos opérateurs, ce sont des opérateurs africains. Alors, il faut le dire, même si on est très, très petit et on n'a pas vraiment un impact économique, la CEA est une institution au service de l'Afrique et on consomme avec beaucoup de plaisir des services, des biens africains. J'espère que ça a une réponse. Merci.
Hi, my name is Christabel Gani from Kenya. My question is, where are we with the discussion?
I was expecting a French question.
Where are we with the discussion on the sensitive products under the AfCFTA? Has this been finalized? Then my question number 2 is, why is Africa still trading less amongst them? As in, why are African countries still trading less, even when they're implementing the AfCFTA?
Merci beaucoup, Joseph. Je viens du Togo et je fais partie également du journaliste réseau des journalistes économiques de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, de la CEA. Alors je voudrais poser aussi également 2 questions. Et ma première question, il y a de cela 1 an, 6 pays ont déjà démarré la mise en œuvre de la ZDK. 6 ou bien 8. Quelques pays ont déjà 6 ou bien 7. Bon, ce n'est pas le même qui est essentiel. Mais c'est parce que certains pays ont déjà démarré la mise en œuvre de la ZDK. Alors, 1 an après, est-ce que vous avez quelques résultats à nous donner aujourd'hui, si effectivement c'est pour booster les échanges intra-africains? Est-ce qu'il y a quelques résultats probants positifs aujourd'hui qui encouragent la mise en œuvre de la ZLE. Et l'autre question, c'est l'impact aujourd'hui des changements climatiques. Parce que qui parle du commerce, parle de la production, parle de l'agriculture. Et tout au long de cette conférence, on a parlé de multiples crises. Et parmi les crises, je pense qu'on a oublié un petit peu aussi les changements climatiques. Alors, est-ce que vous y pensez souvent, l'impact du changement climatique aujourd'hui sur la ZLECAf? Merci.
Let me start with the question from my sister here. Where are we on the sensitive products and why are African countries trading less despite the AfCFTA? That's what I understood the questions to be. Where are we on the sensitive products? I think that is no longer an issue, really. It was an issue at one point, but now we're good. Why do I say that? In the tariff reduction modalities that were agreed under the AfCFTA, the tariff reduction and elimination modalities, we have what we call the 90% ambition, in which countries are given the right to choose 90% of the products autonomously, but those have to be reduced to zero over a maximum period of 10 years. 5 years for the developing African countries and 10 years for the least developed countries. That's the 90%. And when I talk about 90% of products, I mean 90% of the tariff lines under the World Customs Organization's tariff nomenclature. That's what I'm talking about. And then there is another two categories of products. There is one that we call the sensitive products category that accounts for 7% of them. These sensitive products will also be reduced to zero, but they will take longer. For the least developed countries, they will take as long as 13 years from the day of entry into force of the AfCFTA. For the developing African countries, I hope the distinction between least developed and developing is clear by now, because I know this morning we had a presentation on LDCs, LLDCs, etc., etc. So for the least developed countries, up to 13 years. For the developing countries, up to 10 years. But within this period, they all have to come down to zero. Okay? So this is a sensitive category. Now we have 3% of tariff lines products that countries are allowed to exclude from liberalization. Okay? So right now, this is already agreed and countries are implementing them, translating them into their national tariff offers. So that's what I mean when I say that is now done. But countries are submitting their offers. I think right now, if my memory serves me well, about 46 countries have already submitted the tariff offers, which means they have classified the products into 90%, 7%, and 3%, and they are undergoing verification. About 29 of them have actually undergone verification, and they have been approved, and I will come to the countries that are trading right now, on the guided trade initiative. I'll talk about that. So to that extent, I think that is addressed. The second question, why are Africans trading less despite the AfCFTA? Look, the AfCFTA, it coincided with some of the worst calamities as the world has faced. A once in a century pandemic. You know, the AfCFTA was adopted 5 years ago, almost 5 days from now, on the 21st of March 2018. It was adopted 5 years ago, 2018. It entered into force in May 2019. Barely a few months later, in December 2019 and beginning of 2020, COVID closed everything down all around the world. That's when the AfCFTA was created. Despite all that, in August 2020, the AfCFTA Secretariat was established in Accra, Ghana, in the middle of the pandemic. Despite that, the negotiations continued. Virtual though they may be, the in-person meetings were curtailed naturally, but the negotiations continued. The effort to operationalize the AfCFTA continued. So when we say, despite the AfCFTA, Africans are not trading enough, the AfCFTA's potential has yet to be tapped. And this, I think, takes me very easily into, I think you're referring to the guided trade initiative. the Guided Trade Initiative was launched in October last year among 7 countries initially, not 6, and then Tunisia joined and therefore they became 8. So what does the Guided Trade Initiative actually mean? When we talk about the AfCFTA, we are talking about a huge project that would, when it's implemented, that would cause significant legal institutional reforms in every state party. It takes a huge internal reform process before it becomes really part of the day-to-day operational structure of each of our member states. Here, the AfCFTA Secretariat, together with the member states, they wanted to test whether the AfCFTA can really live up to the promises that we think it has. They are trying to test the extent to which the AfCFTA can actually support preferential trade as per the 97.3% distinction that I explained earlier. And what did they do? They identified a number of countries that have met the minimum requirements in terms of having the rules of origin in place, gazetting or publishing in the official legal gazette, the commitments in terms of tariff schedules and everything, and they wanted to test whether this thing is actually fit for purpose, and that's what they did. So governments were actively involved in matchmaking between buyers and sellers. When you see, Kenyan batteries or Kenyan tea landing in Ghana, in Accra, or Egyptian pasta coming to Accra or from Cameroon, there are the Cameroon, Egypt, Kenya, Mauritius, Tunisia. These are some of the countries that are involved, that are actually trading under this. So this is a pilot project to test the capabilities, the potential of the AfCFTA, taking it from the rhetoric down to the ground. That's how I would describe it. So if I, just to conclude on your question back, why do we have less trade in Africa compared to, for example, other regions? It is partly to do with the infrastructure issues that Laura was talking about earlier. It's partly to do with our productive capacity. In fact, the AfCFTA is here because of the problems, not despite those problems. Thank you very much.
Climate change question.
Apologies, I forgot that one. Yes. We are actually working on currently developing a new work stream in which we are estimating the likely impact of the AfCFTA on climate change. Think about it. Logically, it's common sense that when the AfCFTA works, if the AfCFTA works, we know it will. What it means is there will be more economic activity. Laura mentioned earlier about the study we completed on the impact of the AfCFTA on the transport sector. 2,000 new trucks, several hundred new aircraft, cargo aircraft. More economic activity under normal circumstances should mean more carbon emissions. More carbon emissions must be bad for the environment, for the climate. But remember 2 things. One, Africa contributes the least to global climate change, between 3 and 4%. Africa suffers the worst from climate change. Think about that. That's why we talk about climate justice all the time. That's why we talk about, when we talk about transition, we talk about a just transition. In the language, in the lingo of the climate change policy experts, we talk about common but differentiated responsibilities. Differentiated because those who contribute the most to causing the problem must also incur the most cost in remedying it. So in our study, we are looking at the AfCFTA's potential impact on climate change. And the result that we are seeing right now is Africa can actually implement the AfCFTA without causing too much new or additional carbon emissions into the environment, into the atmosphere. Why do we say that? Because green technology is coming. Africans they're not just emitting, we also have some of the most well-known carbon sinks because of the rainforests that we have in the Congo Basin, etc., etc. So the balance right now is not as bad as we might have been thinking. In fact, the story that's coming out, this is something that we're working on right now, the story that's coming out is that Africa can implement the AfCFTA without causing too much damage to the environment. Let me stop there. Thank you very much for reminding me.
Je ne suis pas un interprète, mais je vais faire mieux. En fait, très très brièvement, on est actuellement dans le processus de faire des estimations par rapport à l'impact de la zone de libre-échange, en fait, la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange sur le changement climatique. Et selon nos résultats préliminaires, M. Menakou a dit que, en effet, premièrement, l'impact serait quelque chose de gérable parce qu'on a aussi de grandes ressources forestières pour séquestrer toutes les émissions de carbone. J'espère qu'on le dit ça en français. Et dans ce sens-là, on est bien placé aussi, bien sûr, accroître toute la production sur le continent parce qu'on a aussi, parmi tous les autres pays et régions qui émettent CO2, on est vraiment le continent qui émette le plus bas des émissions. Alors on est bien placé pour en profiter de la SLECAF et de ne pas faire un impact trop négatif en tant qu'on peut séquestrer toutes ces émissions grâce à nos ressources forestières. Alors peut-être que ça serait le message principal. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Roger Mbarga, je viens du Cameroun. Donc très rapidement, je voudrais vous adresser un plaidoyer. Mon pays, enfin le Cameroun, est le seul pays d'Afrique centrale qui est engagé dans l'initiative du commerce guidé. Et donc le message que la presse doit faire là-bas, ce n'est plus le message des promesses de la ZLECAf. C'est le message de la mise en œuvre de l'implémentation de la ZLECAf. C'est-à-dire, le commerce a commencé et vous devez vous engager. Et là, lorsqu'on regarde ce qu'il faut dire aux gens, vous avez le PAPS, le système de paiement, vous avez les règles d'origine, les certificats d'origine, vous avez même l'ALTO, l'Observatoire du commerce africain. Donc le plaidoyer c'est de dire, nous avons besoin de l'information à temps pour pouvoir communiquer chez nous et donc porter ce message et contribuer donc à la sensibilisation. Et je sais que NS fait déjà très bien ce travail avec les hashtags et autres. Mais le plaidoyer, c'est de dire, essayez de nous mettre tout ça en français, par exemple le hashtag. Je sais qu'il y a AfCFTA on tract, mais chez nous, nous avons besoin de ZLECAf quelque chose, soit ZLECAf on move, mais vous voyez que c'est toujours l'anglais. Donc nous avons besoin de ça, de ces informations-là. La question donc qui est la mienne, c'est sur la politique commerciale en elle-même dans la ZLECAf. Pour tirer avantage d'un accord commercial comme la ZLECAf dans un contexte d'intégration, il faut que la politique commerciale et la politique industrielle soient convergentes, soient alignées. Donc, dans les chaînes de valeur prioritaires qui sont les vôtres, il y a l'initiative pharmaceutique, il y a l'initiative des batteries électriques, mais essayez de voir pour une ZLECAf inclusive, puisqu'on parle justement de la réduction des inégalités, des vulnérabilités, essayez également de voir ces chaînes de valeur qu'on peut retrouver dans les zones rurales. Je veux parler par exemple de la chaîne de valeur de la filière manioc, où il y a beaucoup de femmes engagées, où il y a beaucoup de jeunes engagés. Vous savez que la plus grande partie de l'emploi en Afrique, c'est dans l'agriculture et donc dans les zones rurales. La deuxième chose, très rapidement, je finis, Ernest, merci. La garantie que vous avez que la ZLECAf va vraiment créer la valeur ajoutée. Est-ce que dans les PME, est-ce que dans les industries, vous êtes sûr qu'il y aura l'investissement africain, des travailleurs africains pour domestiquer justement la création de la valeur ajoutée? Donc voilà mes questions. Merci.
Let me try to address them in the order that they were presented. The complementarity between trade policy and industrial policy, and I think the question of value addition as a result of the AfCFTA is very much related to that. Okay, so there is no reason why we can assume the trade policy of a country should be complementary to its industrial policy. Very often, these two policy areas are covered by different ministries, and inter-agency cooperation is always a challenge in every country, developed as well as developing. I see that all the time. Okay? But right now, there is a concerted effort that we all are making to make sure that industrial policy and trade policy can talk to each other, can complement each other. Why is that necessary? Why do we say that? For example, in the AU Industrialization Week in Niamey in November, our leaders came out with a very clear statement that industrial policy must complement, support the AfCFTA. We have to have a commodity-based industrialization strategy in the continent to make sure that what we produce can make use of our competitive comparative advantage, very often in natural resource endowments, and we should be able to trade in value-added products that are manufactured within the continent and that meet the rule of origin requirement. When we talk, very often we talk about these rules of origin, and there is an annex that we have been debating on almost endlessly. We have made huge progress right now. It's close to 88%, I think. There are only 2 sectors on which we are stuck, automotive and textiles. Why does the issue of rules of origin take so much? The reason is very simple. We are trying to make sure, through the rules of origin, we are trying to make sure that the AfCFTA serves made in Africa products. Laura introduced the ATEX, Africa Trade Exchange, earlier. It was designed to serve as a platform for trading in goods that meet the rule of origin requirement that can be qualified as made in Africa products. And that's why we need, right now, we are supporting a lot of countries in the development of national AfCFTA implementation strategies. In those strategies, industrial policy is there. Thanks to support from the European Union, we have covered over 28 countries so far, and there is another 10, 12 that are in the pipeline. Industrial policy is part of the AfCFTA implementation strategy in those countries, creating complementarities. And of course, when we talk about regional value chains, what do we mean? Earlier I made the point about the investment argument for the AfCFTA. If the AfCFTA is successful, it will attract investment. And then, because of the rules of origin requirements, that things have to be made within Africa, inputs have to be sourced from within Africa. The moment you produce a particular input in one country, process it in another country, and sell it in a third country, all of them in Africa, are talking about value addition in that process. So this is a natural process in my mind. How do you see the importance of goods from outside Africa, the importation of goods from outside Africa, while they could be imported from within Africa, I think is broadly the question that you asked me, if I get it, including by some of the most advanced countries within the continent. Let me limit myself to the legal side of this, okay? But I'm happy to engage more broadly as well. If you look at the AfCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the agreement, it attempts to create a single market within the continent. It does not try to harmonize the external trade policy of the member states. In other words, South Africa is a part of the AfCFTA. South Africa under the AfCFTA is required to progressively dismantle, eliminate the tariffs on goods originating from within Africa. But that does not stop South Africa from having whatever preference South Africa may have vis-à-vis third countries, non-African countries. The moment we reach the next level in the integration process, from a free trade area to a customs union, at that point we are talking about harmonizing our external trade policies, at which point countries will cease to have the autonomy to set their external tariffs independently. It will have to be done collectively. So right now, these countries have got the right, but then there is a spirit of it. The spirit certainly is, to create an opportunity for Africa to grow by trading with itself. And gradually is what we expect to happen. And gradually, if the market works, African producers should be able to be competitive even on the market. Because think about it. When you talk about the soybeans that you're referring to, we are talking about subsidized products being dumped on our markets. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Perhaps then if I can respond,
yes,
because we had Peut-être pour complémenter un peu la question par rapport aux chaînes de valeur et ne pas oublier le secteur rural. En fait, il faut aussi dire que la SLECAF a maintenant une initiative de 4 secteurs identifiés où on veut promouvoir l'avance, la mise en œuvre de la SLECAF. Et c'est les secteurs pharmaceutiques, comme vous avez dit, c'est aussi les secteurs automotifs, mais il y a aussi le secteur agribusiness, agri-products. Et c'est là peut-être où on peut viser, on peut en profiter de la création de chaînes de valeur pour toute cette population de secteur rural, parce que vraiment la valeur ajoutée, ce n'est pas dans la ferme, c'est le moment où le produit, le manioc, la banane, le plantain, sort de la ferme et part vers le marché. Et c'est entre le marché et le portail de la ferme, c'est là où la chaîne de valeur se passe et c'est là où il y a les plus grandes opportunités de valeur ajoutée côté service. Et c'est sur ça qu'on met l'accent. Parce que vraiment, c'est les secteurs services, on peut employer une grande partie de la population et on peut aussi donner le moyen des activités économiques. En fait, tout l'emballage, le transport, la présentation, en fait, c'est là où on peut vraiment viser et exploiter, d'un certain sens, chaîne de valeur, secteur service pour la population rurale. Et ça serait vraiment l'accent sur lequel on veut mettre nos efforts pour qu'une grande partie de la population aille de profit et aussi de mener des opportunités dans le cadre de la zone de libre-échange. Je pense que ça, c'est une sorte de réponse sur cette question. Maybe now going to the stock markets question, I think the reason why we're saying that it's very difficult to come towards a sort of continental or common stock markets is because stock markets are sort of in the interface of services liberalization when we think of financial services, so services like brokerage and what have you, right? But then also stock markets operate in a realm where you have central banks, you have treasury, you have monetary policy, you have the financial sort of area. And so it's because stock markets are sort of, in that interface that in order for stock markets to sort of thrive in a continental market, you would need to have all systems, ecosystems in place, right? You would need to also have central bankers agree monetary policy convergence. You would need to have financial services liberalized. You would need to have continental regulations on the operations of these stock markets. So it's not part really of the vision of the Abuja Treaty. The Abuja Treaty talks about an African sort of common market down the line, and there is also a vision to have an African sort of development bank and some other African institutions, but there's never really been the discussion around a sort of African common stock market. I think for us to get there, we would need to have liberalization of financial services, but then also sort of that congruence and that sort of coming together around monetary, financial policy, institutional, also sort of, institutions building, so that you can actually have sort of continental stock market institution that would take over some of the roles that typically have been held at the national level by national stock market authorities, right? And depending on the country, it can be a central bank, it can be a treasury, it can be something else. So really coming around that would need a lot of convergence. But we've made the first step. We're liberalizing financial services. So as we move on, and if there's also monetary convergence at some stage, which is part, of course, of the Abuja Treaty vision, who knows, maybe we will get there. So I hope that is some answer. Yes.
Let me add something to that quickly. If you look at it, you can liberalize the financial markets, but in the end, a successful stock market in any country is dependent on strong institutions. Strong institutions that stand behind that market. Look at, for example, the European Union, probably the most advanced integrated system in the world. We don't have a European stock market, really. We have a stock market in Paris, the CAC 40, and the German stock exchange, the FTSE in London, although London is now no longer part of the European Union. It goes on. They remain national. And just look at what's going on right now around the banking industry following the collapse of this the Silicon Valley Bank, right? It tells you what it takes for a successful stock market to exist. You know, the moment you see something, a particular bad news like this in one part of the world, everything starts collapsing. There should be some strong institution that can come in and intervene quickly. Imagine that happening in our continent. We are not there yet. But as Laura rightly indicated, we are just beginning the journey. We are not ending it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's we over 4 o'clock. Just to say one thing, we all as Africans have learned from the Western world is that when the media buys over an agenda, be it national, regional, or continental, it's successful. Be it political, it's successful. And so it's really important that there is some buy-in on the CFTA agenda, which, as you know, is the focus for the African Union as well for this year. So I believe that if you all buy this in, then there's no way we'd have hurdles with implementation, which is one of the biggest challenges we face with the CFTA. Implementation. Okay. So after this, really, let's ask all the right questions to make sure that there's buy-in but understanding, so that we start advocating for. I'm not saying you should become advocates, but we tell the stories so that implementation can happen. So thank you very much. Really, really thank you so much for addressing this, ladies and gentlemen of the media, and thank you too for coming. Let's please go back to the plenary and continue with the discussions. Thank you so much.